racism. And that's what it is. And school closings has nothing to do with school improvement. So I think that's what you hear a lot of the complaints for. If it was about helping kids to make those gains that they need to make, then we would be fine with that.
Apparently money runs this country.
Public is just what it says, public education, public school, public children, public parents, not a group of people that make large sums of money deciding in a closed room setting the future of our children and their education process.
The system needs to allow for an elected school board that is elected by the people that determines what is better for our children.
Public education works. Look at our First Lady. I worked at the grammar school that she was educated at in Chicago. And look what we turned out, the First Lady. Public education works.
Racism is well and alive in this country. We are the descendants of slaves. We are now reversing back to slavery. Backwards never, forward ever. All of you can remember those words.
I hear people say all the time that this generation is lost and this generation is failing, but this generation is not lost. This generation has been neglected.
Philadelphia right now, y'all creating school deserts. School deserts, that's what we are calling them, school deserts. There are schools for miles for children to go to. Do you care? Because you're not going to walk that student to school every day. You're not going to pay for them to get on that bus. You're not going to help them adjust to a different environment.
So while charter schools are presented as a choice, when you take away the school I have a right to and make me have to apply to a lottery just to have a school to go to, that's not choice, that's chance. I get a chance at going to a school, but I don't have any more chance of going to the school in my neighborhood.
A 2009 study documented that only 6% of displaced students transferred to high-performance schools, while 80% went to underperforming ones.
I have 2 children who have learning disabilities, and so as a parent, when I see that the governor of our state takes money from education and then funnels it into prisons, I just want to let you know that Governor Corbett has worked. My oldest son, who's 16, special ed student, is now in prison.
Education is the only sword that can penetrate and pierce through the heart of poverty. The only strike of liberty that can eliminate racism and injustice for people across this great nation. This is the next civil rights movement.
Of course, we called a meeting on one of the worst days in the year. But when I look around and see who's here, that's very important that you all are that serious to come out in this weather and be here to hear the truth about what's happening to your children. So, without further ado, you have the information in front of you, and we're going to call the first panel. Would you come forward? We can get started, okay? Dr. Joe Bishop, you can sit in this part of the panel, and we just shift it around. Whoever shows up. Yeah, that's the way we're going to do it, okay? Russ Ballant and Lamar Lemons, take the other seat. Let me see, is there anyone else that's on the panel? Then we can get started, and we're not going to let anything hold us back, okay? You have to see another chair. All right, I just want to thank the panel for being here. Now, what we really had in mind was getting the people that have been fighting for our cause here, and also putting together this team of people on the panel where no one can say we left out one part of this issue. We've got Eastern Michigan here. We've got Senator Hopgood here. We've got Russ Ballant, researcher for Keep the Vote, Don't Take Over, and Education Task Force. We've got Elena Morado, school board member, and we've got Lamar Lemons, president of the school board. Now, you see them all together. They can't talk about we lied about anything. They will be telling their story. And we're going to start wonderful thing that you made it in this weather. Keep it up. Go right down the road it's 8 minutes limit, and then when they finish, we're going to ask questions from the audience.
Just a real brief background in terms of what I've done. I've spent a lot of time on the Education Committee, both in the House and now in the Senate. And generally, what I'd like to say is that the legislature and state government in general has done a really poor job, I think, of dealing with Detroit Public Schools and some of the challenges that Detroit Public Schools has faced. And I think that this is, the EAA, the Education Achievement Authority, is in many ways the culmination of all of those poor efforts, and if not downright failure. And so I think people do really, really need to be aware of it, because there's a lot of PR, there's a lot of information that's coming from the other side, from the people who support the EAA and all those sorts of things, to really try to cloud things. So when I first started hearing about the EAA, who did they have on board? They had Eastern Michigan University, one of the most important colleges of education in the state of Michigan, Skillman Foundation, the Eli Grove Foundation, some names that you kind of think maybe are okay. You know, Eastern Michigan, absolutely. Skillman, we know them, they're around. And so it's really when you start digging into and really understanding and learning about this experiment that they've been attempting to foist on to the people of the state of Michigan, you really become concerned. Now, so the schools opened in the fall of 12, and just a little bit after the schools started educating kids, there was an effort to push legislation in Lansing to put the EAA, this experiment, into law, to expand it, and to do all sorts of other things. Now, if you remember at the end of 2012, a lot of mischief, a lot of crazy legislation was flying around in Lansing, and this was one of the bills that was going around. Now, you can't really say there's one bill, because there was actually 3 or 4 different versions of this bill. One was 50 pages, one was 75 pages, and one was 100 pages. And who knows what nonsense they were trying to ram through at the end of the year. Thankfully, that didn't happen. The legislative year ended, and we started into the new year of 13. Legislation was quickly put together, and that debate has continued to go on in the legislature. The bill's back in the House. It started off in the House. It passed the House. The Senate changed it significantly in very interesting ways. They actually took out any references to the EAA. It's all about the EAA, but they took out any reference to the EAA. So very sneaky. And so now it's back in the House in a much different version. So there's some kind of negotiating, there's some debate that's going on between the House and the Senate. But if any version goes forward, I don't think it's going to be a good version. Let me just say that straight out. Now, as this whole process was moving forward, there were lots of questions that were raised. And as they started talking to us in Lansing, you got the very strong feeling that this was a sell job. So, what they said is they brought in a bunch of people and they said everything was great, this is the best thing ever, and they really pushed you with this moral imperative. If we don't do this, what's going to happen to the kids in Detroit? As if there was no other option.
First, I just want to explain about the Educational Achievement Authority, and in particular, the faculty in the College of Education at Eastern Michigan University are almost unanimously against the agreement that was signed. In fact, in early December, we pranced around the hall in which the EAA had its board meetings on campus at Eastern. I was carrying a megaphone, and we spent 2 45-minute time slots when they were going in and out to their meetings protesting. And in fact, just to put this a bit in context, the faculty at Eastern Michigan University, one of the most renowned college of education, as the Senator said, in Michigan, but in fact in the country, have a diversity of professional experiences and training. I, for instance, I'm actually a high school dropout. I lived on the streets for a few years. I got a GED. I entered a vocational program, and I switched to a community college, and I kept going to university, and I'm now a professor of education. Something I think all students and young people and children deserve. I have other colleagues who have studied the Michigan school system, and they can tell you, if you give it the average MEP score at a school, they can tell you pretty closely how much the average family is making in that school. There's a direct link between poverty and lower test scores, whether it's on the MEP or the ACT or any of these other situations. And numerous other colleagues who study those and other similar situations. So the remarks, I might ad-lib a bit, but I want to highlight, maybe you know Chris Savage, who has a blog called Eclecta Blog. I started following him, and recently, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, he's been sharing the results of interviews with EAA teachers explicitly documenting the harmful practices experienced by children in EAA schools. Let me stress that I'm going to keep saying EAA because it's quicker than Educational Achievement Authority. But just like No Child Left Behind, nobody wants to leave a child behind, and we all want children to achieve. The real issue is the authority in the term. EAA students sit in large classes of 50 or so students. This flies in the face of the results of much of the research on small class size that demonstrates, particularly for younger students, grades 1, 2, 3, 4, kindergarten, perhaps 5, maybe even 6, that class sizes of about 15 are ideal. As in the 1980s, the state of Tennessee conducted a lot of studies on small school sizes, and Lamar Alexander, who was the governor then, there are some rumors that he tried to cover up the releasing of the results of it during the time that he was being appointed as Secretary of Education. One professor was summarizing this. I just dug this up today. He's a professor of mathematical statistics. So he's looking through all of these studies, and he wrote, after 4 years, it was clear that smaller class sizes did produce substantial improvement in early learning and cognitive studies, and that the effect of small class size on the achievement of minority children was initially about double that observed for the majority children. And in later years, that is, as children, junior high and high school, secondary school, it's about the same. It's the most critical period of a child's life is his or her younger years. That's why we have Head Start programs, because the research has shown this. Research on Head Start shows us that children who participate in Head Start programs excel and increase their educational achievement during their time in the program. They lag behind again in the summer because they often don't get the enrichment activities that children of the elite are able to afford to give their children. The governor is not sending his children to an EAA school, is he? No. Nor are, I think, any of the politicians who supported it, nor any of the community members who supported it.